And of course that music takes us to the introduction for A Pale Blue Dot today, Wednesday the 5th of July at 6 minutes past 3. Mary Pike here at the desk, but with me is Keith. Good afternoon, Keith.
Good afternoon, Mary, and good afternoon, listeners. I think I'm introducing the program for the day and telling you what's going to be done today. Well, this is pretty interesting. In fact, it's quite a coup. I think that I have with me today David Menhennett, who, with his partner Lizzie, has built and is living in a tiny house here in the Kiewa Valley. And for us at Pale Blue Dot, it covers all of our bases. It's about living sustainably, and it is a local example of how we can best use the resources of our planet. Now, the rest of our program, after we've interviewed David and pummeled him about his tiny house, I'm going to be looking at, as usual, first of all at the National Energy Market, which we do every time we have our program, the energy market right now. And then there's quite a few other things which we need to look at, basically from newspaper articles and a fairly frightening news item that was on the news this morning. I don't know how many of you were listening to the fact that the world average temperature is now at an all-time measurement record. But we'll be talking about that later on, and a few other items which are of some interest at the moment that I've either culled from newspapers or looked at in the Guardian newspaper is my main source.
And I'm going to have my sixpenneth worth with
And Mary
Fogo.
will always have her sixpenneth
Yet
worth.
again. And we should say good afternoon, David, and welcome to Alpine FM.
Good afternoon, guys. It's lovely to be here.
I'll leave it up to you, Keith.
David, as I've just said, I've told our listeners that you've built your own tiny house. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
And can I ask you first how you first of all came to the idea that a tiny house was the way to go?
Yes, that's an excellent question. Keith, both my wife and I were living in Hong Kong at the time, and we decided to move back to Australia because we thought it was time to move back. And we weren't sure what to do with living arrangements. So we basically decided we went to a tiny house convention.
Oh, good heavens.
The Tiny House Carnival in St Ives in the very beginning of 2020.
Oh, right.
And
That's St Ives, UK, isn't it?
no, St Ives in Sydney.
Oh, St Ives in Sydney.
Yes.
Okay.
And it was there that we were listening to a gentleman called Fred Schultz talk.
Yep.
And he asked if he could have a show of hands on people that were interested in potentially living in the future in a tiny house. And I found myself staring at my raised arm thinking, oh God, that's me. That's what we're going to do.
It sounds like a Christian conversion crusade. So, not quite. Okay.
So yeah, that's essentially what. And so we spent the next 18 months designing and planning to move back to Australia, and build our own tiny house.
So you went back to Hong Kong after you'd seen
Yes,
this
we
seminar,
did.
and then had to think about the way you'd. Okay.
That's right, and that's when COVID hit the world.
Yeah.
And so I pretty well spent the lockdown time designing a tiny house and planning our return.
Still in
to
Hong
Australia.
Kong at that stage.
Correct.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Yeah. So it took us about another year to get. Was it another year? Another year to get back to Australia through COVID lockdown.
Yeah. That's
everything.
right.
Yeah, we wouldn't have let you back in. Well, I don't mean David just specifically, but we had very
Mary
tight
didn't mean
restrictions.
Yes, it was tough.
Well, okay. Well, this gives me a bit of a lead in, actually. But once you had decided that was what you were going to do, obviously one of the first things you did was spend quite a while designing the place yourself at home. But, you must have actually been looking at resources and materials and things like that during that time too. So what sort of resources did you look for? And
Okay, so one of the first things we basically purchased was the trailer.
Yeah, okay.
And we purchased the trailer from the gentleman I was referring to earlier, Fred Schultz, who's based in Castlemaine, and that's what he specialises in.
Yep.
He specialises in building tiny house trailers, and also he has an online course on how to build a tiny house.
Right.
And just incidentally, he was your nice little discount if you've done the course, and then you buy a trailer, you get the price of the course
yet this
off.
was all by chance in Sydney. I mean, you must have. Yeah, just fantastic.
Yes. So we arrived in Sydney, and we were due to spend 2 weeks with my mum, who has a single-bedroom apartment in North Sydney. And 1 week into our quarantine, we went into 3 months' worth of lockdown.
Right.
And ended up spending over 100 days with my mum instead of the 2 weeks. And just to let you know, we're still friends.
I was going to say this.
But it was touch and go.
Yeah. And obviously, when you did your design, though, even at that distance removed,
yes,
and you obviously bought your trailer while you were thinking about this, you obviously got in contact with him. But again, you had to have been thinking about what resources you'd use, what you'd actually put into building the house.
Yes.
Yeah. So, where'd you get that information?
This was a good question. We did it pretty well we went by feel.
Yeah.
We basically sort of blundered our way into it.
Yeah.
And we we drove south from Sydney right at the end of COVID, and we stopped at a place called Yarrawonga, because I love the name.
Yep.
And we ended up living in Mulwala, just across the bridge.
Yeah, we know Mulwala.
And building a tiny house in Yarrawonga. And we lucked out with a place to rent. And B, a place to build the tiny house.
Okay.
So that's where we started. We got the trailer delivered, and the fantastic thing about the gentleman whose shed we used, Ray, fantastic guy. He had a gypsy caravan parked in his shed.
Right.
And he said, "Well, why don't you build your tiny house next to my gypsy caravan?"
Yeah.
And so it was the perfect.
Absolutely.
It was.
But your tiny house would be a bit taller than his gypsy
My
caravan.
tiny house is huge.
Can I put a spider in the works to start with? You keep talking about a trailer.
Yes.
We're talking about a house. What's the trailer got to do with it?
So the tiny house trailer, that's what we built our tiny house on.
Why?
Because that's a great question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me why before.
Why do you have to put your tiny house on a trailer?
So you can be mobile. So you can basically park your house wherever you want to.
Does it have to be mobile, or could you?
No. You can have it on skids, or you can have it on. But so the benefits of having it on a trailer is you basically ally yourself with the laws of the caravan, which are a whole lot easier with local councils and that kind of kind of stuff.
So they have to.
Thank you.
And we're a bit familiar with that in the UK, because we've seen that sort of thing on some programs regarding that sort of thing in the UK. How you build those places and you've got to keep them on wheels.
Yes.
Or, you bury the wheels in a trench. In some places in the UK. Yeah. Okay, look, that's terrific. So, all right. I still don't. Were there any considerations about the particular materials you had to use?
I was just about to answer that question. So one of the benefits of the place we were building in Yarrawonga was that it was 4 minutes drive away from the closest Bunnings and another hardware store just across the highway.
Yeah.
So I used those two places heavily. Yeah. So when we build our second tiny house,
okay.
It will be. We really hope to build using recycled materials, like 80%. This one was not recycled. This was all brand spanking new stuff, straight out of Bunnings, because it was easiest. Yeah. And we'd never done it before.
So this was built in Yarrawonga.
Correct.
And it's the same one that's here now.
Correct.
So now we know why it was on wheels.
Yes. Yeah. So we had it towed up here almost exactly a year ago. And that's where we came to be in the Mongans Bridge Caravan Park.
Yep.
Because they were closing for 3 months because they were renovating their amenities block. And I said, well, look, we don't need an amenities block. We've got one in the tiny house. Yeah. Can we have long-term, cheap site usage? And they said yes, very kindly.
Very good. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Okay. Look, I had the privilege of taking a tour of your house recently, and I was very impressed indeed with the livability of it. Can you actually describe for our listeners the basic plan of how it works?
Sure can. So it's the dimensions of the tiny house are essentially 8 metres long by 2.5 metres wide and 4.3 metres high to the highest point from the road to the roof, which is Australian legal dimensions for towing.
Yep.
So you don't need any oversized signage or special pilot vehicles when you tow.
That's significant. Yeah.
So that's why. Yep. And also the 8, and now it can be as long as you like. You can, there are some the Americans are fantastic for this. They have the hugest tiny houses in the world. So some of them are like 12 metres.
Well, their ordinary camping trailers look like mansions to me. me.
Yes. So we went for 8 metres because for 2 people living in a tiny house full time, it's great. And we've essentially got 2 lofts.
Yep.
So we've got a loft at each end.
Yep.
One's a sleeping loft above the kitchen, and the other's a study storage loft above the bathroom and laundry.
Yep.
And then we've got like a living room in the middle that has it goes all the way to the ceiling.
Yeah, absolutely
How
brilliant.
deep are the lofts?
So
if the whole thing is only 4 metres high.
That's another excellent question, Mary. You're asking some really good questions. So it's always an issue for headroom in your lofts in a tiny house because you're only 4.3 metres high to start with, and then your loft height has to be it's 2.1 metres or something. But so you basically, we scrimped and saved for every millimetre of headspace in our lofts. And it's super important. You can't scrimp on head height if you're.
So is there a regulation about how high the loft's got to be for a body, a standing body?
It's more of a regulation on how high the ceiling of your loft floor is.
Yep.
It's a certain amount of height.
Ah, right.
Which you can. Can I say this on radio? We made ours a little smaller than it's supposed to be.
We didn't hear that.
You can fudge without fudging.
We did, yes, because I'm 6 foot. I'm just under 6'2".
Yes.
Lizzie's a lot shorter than that.
Yes.
And so I basically put myself in my work boots and my hat on, and my head
almost
came to the joists of the loft. So I thought, you know what? That's plenty.
That's plenty.
For us.
Yes, of course.
So how much room does that leave you actually in the loft? You're over 2 metres in the loft?
Yeah, no. So then when you go up into the loft, we've got stairs that lead up to our sleeping loft, and I sleep on the stair side because Lizzie's she's more compact. But I can sit up quite. So I can sit up in bed, and I've got about 1.5 metres from the loft floor to the gabled ceiling.
So it's a little bit like being on some of those caravans where the sleeping area is above the driver's.
I have to say this. When I was looking around, I didn't see it at first, and I'm sitting having my cup of herbal tea, and I looked around, and here is a tiny, tiny wood stove.
Oh, yes.
It's just amazing.
That's our cubic mini wood stove.
Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, that was a deal breaker for me. I had to have a wood stove. I had to have a wood stove, and skylights were 2 things that I needed in the tiny house. Yeah. Whereas Lizzie had to have a bathtub.
A bath?
So
we've
bathtub? Yes.
Yeah. I think it's what they call a shub. A shower tub, so it's the base of the shower.
Yeah.
But it's quite a good sized bathtub.
I can have baths.
Yeah.
So
But she can have them more easily.
Much more easily. Yes, correct.
Yeah. That's amazing. Okay, as far as energy is concerned,
yes.
All right. Can you give me some idea of how much it costs you to heat the place and cool it? Have you got any? Of course, you probably don't know how much to cool it because you haven't been there for. Oh, yes, you have.
Well, at the moment we're in the caravan park, so we've got electricity and water already piped in.
Okay.
But when we move from the caravan park, we'll be on. We're going fully off grid, so we'll be solar panels, propane gas, and rainwater catchment.
Right.
So it's going to be super cheap.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Once you've set it up.
Once we set it up.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So at the moment, there isn't really a cost thing to be concerned about.
No.
But when you shift, obviously, it's just a matter of setting up, and you've got to have a place to set up.
Correct.
Because you're not going to put your panels on the roof.
No, we're not. They are going to be on a separate stand beside the tiny house, which is it's easier. And it's better for positioning the panels perfectly for year-round sunshine.
You might even get one that does that. I've seen them.
Yes.
And if you have to move the tiny house again, you don't have to worry about breaking your...
Correct. Because at one stage we were going to put the solar panels as our the roof for our veranda, and it's just a whole world of...
Yeah. Okay. So you'll have solar panels. You'll have you've already got your bathtub. You've got. I saw you had space enough for some of the most important books. I don't know where all the others are. There's got to be more. And you've also got a really good kitchen, etc. What about toilet and grey water?
Sure. So we have a composting toilet, so that means we don't have to have any black water systems. And our grey water systems go, they simply go into, you just have a hole in the ground, essentially, that your grey water goes into. Now, in a caravan park, caravans do that all the time. They just have tubes going off into the... And they just make sure that you move it around from time to time. When we get where we're going, we'll actually have a proper committed grey water well, I guess you'd call it. With proper pipes and rocks and reeds and things.
Yeah. Look, that would be terrific. Actually, if I'd have had the strength and the purpose in those days, we had a grey water system for a little while, and I went away from it because it just became too hard to manage. But if I'd have had any common sense, I would have spent more money and probably had it work just like that into a pond and marsh area. That's a smart idea.
And ours is going to go into our vegetable garden, which is going to be a terraced vegetable garden below the tiny house, so it'll automatically go into that. So
are you moving still locally, or are you going a long way away?
Do you know what, Mary? We are a little bit disappointed about this, but we're actually having to move. We're moving away from the valley. We wanted to stay, but we're moving. We're about 2 hours drive away in Tatong.
Tatong,
which is a beautiful place in Victoria, but it's still. We did want to stay here in the valley, but things just haven't worked out that way.
Still in high country there, aren't you?
Absolutely. We're still in the Alpine Shire, basically.
Is that
so where's Tatong? Is it in the Mitta Valley?
No. It's halfway between Benalla and Mansfield.
Okay, gotcha.
Right in the middle there.
I'll come and visit.
Yes, absolutely.
They've got a pretty active community.
They've got a great community, actually.
It's a small community, but a very active one. And was that choice because you simply couldn't find a property here suitable?
Yes and no. We came across this website called Park My Tiny House, and the gentleman whose property we'll be moving on to put his land up on this website, and he actively encouraged tiny house owners to come and strike up a deal with him, which is fantastic. Because that is one of the hardest things about owning a tiny house. If you don't have family that has land, where you park your tiny house is always the big
especially
ask.
if you want to stay there for any length of time and develop.
Like us, we're what we call one-hit wonders. We want to move as little as we can and stay somewhere for as long as we can. And do all those good things.
But
like
still
verandas.
have the opportunity to have vegetable gardens,
of course,
that sort of thing. Which you can't have if you're in a caravan park, for example.
Yes.
So we did briefly get into the tiny house movement when I was talking to you at your place. When I was at, do you know very much about the way it's happening or what's happening in the tiny house movement? Could you tell us a bit what's happening both nationally and maybe internationally?
Absolutely. Well, we'll go back to our friend Fred Schultz. So his business, which is primarily creating trailers to build tiny houses on, it tripled during COVID. So because people were just right, I want to move out of the cities and I want to live alternatively. And so tiny houses is a big box ticker for that particular. So the tiny house movement is alive and well. And then the people that towed us from Yarrawonga up to the valley, Rick's Towing, and he's affiliated through Fred. He's got a big towing company, but he handles all the tiny house moving. He's got a Unimog, a Mercedes Unimog that he tows tiny house.
Wow.
And he is basically doing one tiny house move per day. And he's booked out. So we had to come up slightly prematurely because he was just booked out.
And that's obviously what's happening there. And are we presuming this is? I mean, are there other people who do what Fred's doing?
Yes, there are. There are people who, and there are also a growing number of people who will build you a tiny house. There's a group in New South Wales called, and you'll love the acronym here, Design Echo Tiny Houses. Death. And they're based out of Ulladulla, and they pretty well produce one tiny house per week. That's how fast they've got big factory. So they're only going upwards.
So it can be do it yourself or order on.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's not cheap anymore either. It's going to cost you, I'm going to say, well over $100,000 if you want something custom built.
But to me, honestly, David, looking at your place, I'd reckon it'd be worth well over $100,000 anyway, just looking at what it is and the livability of it. I mean, I don't know whether listeners can understand this without seeing it, but it's totally different from the experience of walking into a caravan.
Yes.
Now, it might be just what you've done. Well, it is. It's totally different because you've got, as I say, these bookcases, these wardrobes that, it just looks like a little house. It's
hardwood floors and skylights and stoves. Yeah. Totally. It's a very different experience.
And you're obviously enjoying living in it.
Yes, we love it. It's almost been a year now since we've full-time tiny house living, and we wouldn't do anything else.
And you've even got 2 cats.
We've got 2 cats. They are interesting to sleep with sometimes. And what I'm really looking forward to is when we get to this land we're going to be moving on to, is building a veranda at the front of the tiny house. Yeah. That's going to be huge because that will almost double our living footprint. That's not a small veranda. So yeah.
Very good. I reckon that's terrific, and I'm really. It's been terrific meeting you, actually.
Thanks.
And it's terrible that you're actually leaving the valley. It's a damn nuisance. But I certainly would like to come down and visit and see how it goes in the future.
Yep.
Because it's something that obviously. It seems to me that it's more in Australia. It's a perfect solution to people who don't want to spend $500,000 on something with 4 bathrooms and 16 bedrooms.
We like to think so.
Yeah, and I just think it's wonderful. It's a great idea. Thank you so much, David,
pleasure,
for coming on the program.
Me.
And as I say, we will keep it up. We'll keep in touch.
Thank you.
David, we try and find a piece of appropriate music to farewell our interview.
And you know why I mentioned his 2 cats?
Because it's
a line out of the song.
It is too. And so we're farewelling you with Our House by Crosby, Stills and Nash. No Young, just Crosby, Stills and Nash. Yes, this is the shortened version.
Okay.
So thank you from both of us, David, for a really interesting interview.
And
I wish you well when you do move. But
thank you.
If you could delay it would be rather good. Okay? So here we go.
I'll light the fire